For any followers of the blog, might be asking why am I doing a video and not just typing this up? And that's a good question. Really, what I wanted to do here, and I didn't think the blog was the right media, was really to go through this game and also highlight the actual battlefield and take some shots, kind of look at the game and the deployment and the map, especially, and then actually be able to walk through the battlefield itself, kind of a little bit of the history around the battle. And that's not something that I felt a blog media really would get across as thoroughly. So hopefully this turns out and everyone kind of enjoys this. Maybe I'll make a couple more videos. Please leave a comment if this is something that you enjoy and if you'd like to see perhaps a few more of these in the future. And with that, I wanted to jump a little bit right into the history of the battle. So the Battle of Tippecanoe was fought in November of 1811 and was really a period of a lot of conflict between the fledgling United States and Native Americans in what was called the Northwest Territory at the time. Today would be modern day Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and basically the territory between the original colonies and the Mississippi. And so this was basically a conflict that originated back when the United States was still part of the British Empire and colonies, and the American colonists wanted to continue to expand. As more and more folks came over from Europe, there was an increased want to expand westward. However, after several conflicts with the natives, after the French and Indian War, the British government really decided that it was very costly to try to, police this area and provide protection. So they really ratchet down and clamp down on colonists expanding westward. And this was one of the many reasons the colonists were not very happy with Great Britain. And so when the American Revolution came to an end and the Treaty of Paris was signed, one of the things formally recognizing the U.S. and the boundaries of what the new United States would be was all of this territory that was, from the present colonies, basically out to the border of Canada and out to the French territory and at the Mississippi. Basically, all of that Northwest Territory was ceded to the United States. And so at that point, the U.S. decided that, this is land that we've wanted to expand into. We finally don't have the British telling us no. And so they started to send colonists. And the Native Americans, as you can imagine, decided to say, wait a minute, we weren't at any of these treaty negotiations. And so this wasn't land that Great Britain had the right to, have any say over and to give to anyone. So, as one would imagine, that created a lot of conflict. There was already conflict. Little Turtle and an Indian Confederacy already had several battles in the 1790s, and early in that period actually had several victories. Um, St. Clair's defeat near kind of modern day Fort Wayne was actually an Indian or Native American battle that was one of the worst military army defeats for U.S. history for a long time. And that might be another battle that I talk about and do another video of soon. But early in this conflict, there was a lot of natives that were using a lot more what we would call guerrilla tactics, a lot of hit and run tactics, and they didn't fight pitched battles. And there was really no standing United States military force at the time. A lot of uh, militia and that were not well trained, and so the early battles the really favored the natives. However, um, by the basically the 1800s. Little Turtle and his rebellion was put down by Anthony Wayne at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and that Confederacy was forced to sign the Treaty of Glenville, and that basically gave all of the Ohio area to the United States and kind of opened up and said, this is going to be U.S. land, and Native Americans had to push westward into Indiana. However, from the beginning of the 1800s all the way up to 1811, if we look, you can see that increasingly there were more treaties, there were more purchases of native land, many times not at prices that were ones that all parties would say were favorable. And the other issue was that borders of native tribes and areas were not quite what kind of European and American and Western civilization had.
A lot of different tribes that kind of intermixed in given land. And so there was, a lot of natives that increasingly were getting frustrated with a lot of these purchases and a lot of these negotiations, not feeling like the Americans were really doing it in good faith. And so they increasingly there became some certain tribes and certain groups that basically would boycott different negotiations, and they actually did get some skirmishes back and forth. There might be natives attacking settlers pushing into Indian territory, settlers retaliating, and back and forth. Hard to say who exactly was the kind of the first shots back and forth, but definitely a lot of bad stuff on both sides. You can understand definitely the natives' point of view that here's these people kind of moving into their lands that they've been in for generations. Um, and then, from the colonist point of view, hey, we just won this war with Great Britain. This is our land. We have this treaty. Say, look at this piece of paper here says that this is all part of our country. So, we're going to move folks in as we see fit. And so, increasingly there became more and more natives frustrated. And that is where Tecumseh fits in. Tecumseh was a Shawnee tribal leader, and he had been around conflict for most of his life. His father died actually fighting American colonists in 1774, and his older brother also perished fighting Americans in 1792. Um, so Tecumseh was really very much dead set against the American encroachment into native lands. He basically had fought with Shawnee Chief Blue Jacket, who was part of Little Turtle's rebellion, which ended in at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. But he was definitely not okay, especially as the after the Treaty of Greenville, the U.S. decided to continue to push into what is now the Indiana Territory. So he actually started to reach out to other tribes, different tribes, kind of to put together a kind of multi-tribal confederation to try to resist American expansion. And one of the reasons he was successful was because of his brother, um, and I'll try to say the name. I'll probably not pronounce it very well, but Tenskwata. But he was also known as a prophet. He was very much a kind of spiritual leader, but actually kind of helped really rally a lot of natives to the cause. And through the early 1800s, leading up to 1811, the Tecumseh and his brother, the prophet, were able to really get a lot of native support for this confederacy. And in fact, they actually had a rather large native village, multi-tribal village, that was nicknamed Prophetstown, and it was near modern day Lafayette, Indiana, kind of north central Indiana, and so there was a lot of growing resistance, and as you can imagine, a lot of growing kind of fear on the American side that they didn't want another rebellion on their hands. And this is where William Henry Harrison comes into play. And William Henry Harrison was the governor of the Indiana Territory at the time. He had negotiated a lot of those purchases between 1800 and 1809. Looking at that treaty map, notice there was not a lot of progress after 1809, and a lot of that was due to really a lot of anger on Tecumseh's part because, again, didn't feel like that all of the different native tribes, nations that were in those lands, you know, were represented at the treaty sale negotiations. And so basically, there was an increasing escalation of tensions between both groups. Some minor things happening where some colonists were are attacked, and you know different various small confrontations that eventually escalated further and further. Many meetings between Tecumseh and Harrison between 1809 and into 1811, and Tecumseh basically in the last meeting said, "Look, I'm going to you know, go out to recruit some more. I've told my folks to, behave while I'm gone, and my brother will be in charge, and we'll continue our negotiations when I get back." Unfortunately, during this time, there was a few more altercations and escalations, and eventually Harrison, in contact back to Washington, said, "Look, the only way that I can deal with this is through military means." And at Fort Harrison near modern day Terre Haute, there was a guard that ended up getting shot, and that was kind of the last straw. Harrison had gathered about 1,000 men and said, "I'm going to put an end to this once and for all," and started to march north. So before I get into the game and really kind of go through kind of the battlefield, just a few more pictures. This was a map that was drawn, I believe, in 1819. So again, a little bit after the war, but and after the battle, but kind of shows the area that we're talking about here. So near the Wabash River, and you can see Prophetstown, and then just west of that is the Burnett Creek, and really there's kind of a little bit of a lowland next to the creek, and then on the west side there was a very sharp bluff. There was also on the east side kind of a sharp bluff that kind of came down to a point. So this is almost like a small, almost like a peninsula that you had a couple drop-offs on either side. The Burnett's Creek to the west, and then there was a old church, like a mission, on the north end of where the battlefield was. So the next map I want to show you was something that was done a little bit later. I think this one was like the 1830s, but again, kind of illustrates the area a little bit better. Um, you've got basically this kind of peninsula. You can see on the kind of the bottom there, running diagonally, a bluff, and then another kind of the jagged looking line next to Burnett's Creek there is on the west end. Um, and then kind of north is more towards the up where it says the college, and the south is kind of near that point. So yeah, Harrison kind of set up his troops up there. He had was on this is only maybe a couple miles west of Prophetstown, and going into the evening, they had heard rumors. I think they had maybe had some folks that were on patrol and had heard some rumors that they might get attacked. So Harrison actually had his men stay in uniform with their rifles loaded next to them as they went to sleep that night, because there was a very high likelihood they might get attacked, and that was very typical for native attacks, to really be kind of surprise attacks. They did not follow the conventions of the time. They were not going to line up in pitched battles and line up like regulars forces at the time in the early 1800s would expect. And so the last map I wanted to show, found this one online. Someone had kind of put together the battle. It's pretty close. I wouldn't say it's exact. North is more where that Catholic mission is more the direction of north. So really the Burnett's Creek is a lot more west of the battlefield. But again, those thick black line, that's the kind of the high bluff, and I'll show you what that looks like physically from the actual battlefield here in a minute. But you had this island, and you had basically around that perimeter, Harrison set up his men, and they were kind of ready to go heading into the battle. One thing that this map doesn't show real well, but it says the kind of the first attack was near the south. Most reports say that the first attack was there on the northwest kind of corner. It was more kind of a distraction to kind of get the attention of the main troops, and then you really had the major kind of big push kind of attack there at the south, at the first wave, and then kind of a surrounding kind of from both sides. Very high intensity, very fierce kind of attack in the middle of the night. Again, the American forces went to bed kind of with their muskets loaded, in full uniform, ready to go. So they were able to actually attack pretty quickly. There are a lot of rumors, especially around here. Most people grow up hearing, the story in schools around here that the prophet had knew the Americans were out there. He said that he had a vision and that the American bullets would go right through and not hurt the natives, and so that's why they attacked. From things that I've seen, that's not necessarily a substantiated report, but that's definitely kind of local kind of legend that surrounds this battle. And so with that, I want to jump over real quick to the map. So here's the map again. This is showing kind of an example of the deployment. There's actually some different rules for how to set up. The American player normally sets up Harrison, and the supply and corral marker go on one of the X spots on the map. Then all the other American units must be a minimum of 3 hexes, but no more than 4 hexes away from Harrison. And then, interestingly, the native forces actually roll to see for each tribe how many units are going to come on to the map at the beginning. And so, again, and this is kind of an example. And then certain different tribes come in on different areas. So the Shawnee can come in either on the east or the west map end. So for this map, or east and west are actually top and bottom. And then um, the south is the Kickapoo tribes, and the Winnebagos come in on the north end. Uh, the lines here show kind of broken terrain. The yellow is broken 1 hex, and orange is broken 2. Again, those roughly equate to where those ridge lines are. And I really like the kind of the interesting perspective of this map. Definitely something a little bit different, not a straight down, but kind of more at an angle, kind of showing, kind of coming into the spot. But again, very interesting. This would be kind of how the battle will be set up, and usually going to be in this kind of triangular format. But again, looking at those maps, that's kind of how the actual battlefield looked. So I'm going to start real quick looking at the north edge of the battlefield, right about in this area. So we will cut over to what that looks like today. Okay, here I am, Battle of Tippecanoe battleground. This is the entrance parking lot.
museum just north of the battlefield. Take some pictures. Some post-battle, some interesting stuff. Potawatomi Trail of Death memorial up there, and a few other things, which are kind of out things that kind of aftermath of the Battle of Tippecanoe. And most accounts say that the first kind of attack kind of happened up here, would have been on the northeast end, down on this edge, probably a little bit past the nature center there. There's that building you see today. Harrison's camp would have been probably not too far from where the memorial sits, maybe a little bit further south than that. And so yeah, this is kind of the main edge. There's some officer memorials over there. There's several around. Take some pictures of those as we get over there. This is about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks maybe, before the anniversary of the battle, so would have been maybe like this, probably some more leaves changing colors in fall, by November 7th. But
So the next area I want to highlight is the northwest edge of the battlefield. This is the approximate location that the first attacks took place, and that would be located right about in this area. So let's take a look at what that looks like.
Northwest edge of the battlefield, where you park, monument, a couple more officer memorials, and the fence up in the upper section of the battlefield. Again, there's the ridge just on the other side here. Some stairs going down on the north edge. This was approximately where the first attack would have taken place, is on this end of the battlefield.
Next, we'll move to about the middle of the battlefield, probably about where the Harrison and the supply markers are. This kind of represents where General Harrison's tent was, command tent, as well as all of the kind of supply train that they kind of kept protected in the middle of the battlefield. Not sure if this is the exact location, but I think kind of map wise and approximately where I was standing on the current battlefield, it's probably about the location right here, about dead in the middle of the actual battlefield. So let's take a look at kind of what the view looks like from there.
Kind of in the middle of the battlefield here. Again, the southern line. Those memorials for the officers are down there. Eastern edge, battlefield. The west ridge line basically drops off down there. Monument, northern edge, that way.
Next area I want to look at is the kind of the southwest edge of where the actual U.S. forces were deployed. This would have been kind of the southern flank, looking next to this ridge line just above the Burnett's Creek area. So this is a good video because it'll actually show how deep that ridge line was. So let's go take a look real quick. So you can see from that area that that ridge line's pretty deep, pretty steep. Something you wouldn't really want to be climbing up at 4:30 a.m. You know, going into battle, but we're going to go down a little bit further, basically the extreme southern end of the battlefield, which is about right here on the map. And this is kind of the easiest way you could get down to that lower area at the bottom of that ridge, which is, I'm sure, as natives kind of surrounded the area, would have came up this direction to get to that southern area a lot easier than scaling that giant ridge.
And I'm at the very southern part of the battlefield. Battlefield's very narrow here. Some second attacks came from. You can see this is modern day North Ninth Street coming from Lafayette to Battleground. Railroad tracks running alongside. So kind of on a little bit of a peninsula. On my left hand side to the west of the battlefield, there's this large ridge. Drops down. We'll head down there in a little bit, but Burnett's Creek is straight this way. Not too far. I've been down there before with my family. It's probably another 1,000 yards that way. Very beautiful this time of year. This is the battlefield, most of the battlefield. Monuments for the officers that way. Okay, I'm at the bottom of the ridge. The southern edge of the battlefield where I took last video was right up here. You can see you can come down around. They've actually put a fence along the western edge here of the battleground. And Burnett's Creek this way. Can't really see it from here with the undergrowth, but it's over that way, not too far. Again, this is probably we're only a couple weeks from when the battle would have took place, so it would have very easily looked very similar to this in 1811.
That was the southern end of the battlefield, and then the transition down to that lower area at the bottom of the ridge. So from there, we are going to just move down just a little bit, basically the bottom of the ridge from where those memorials were up top, and show you kind of how this opens up down here at the bottom.
Still at the bottom of the ridge in main battlefield. Would be up those steps. They're under construction. I came around this way, all along the fence. There's a gate open. We're gonna head down there in a little bit, down to the creek. Again, but this kind of opens up down here, kind of a lower section below the main battlefield. So here we are down at Burnett's Creek. This is on the western edge of the battlefield, kind of the southern, southwest edge. And natives ended up surrounding the camps. They would have came back down through this way, probably up a little bit higher. There's the gate that I just came through to come down here, basically along the western edge of the battlefield. Would have been very easy to circle around down here and then come up on the south edge during the second attack, which is, from accounts, what happened. And there's the officer memorials. I start there, head in a line easterly towards the road, towards the east end. We're just slightly northeast of where the Burnett's Creek area is. Again, this is kind of the lower plateau by the riverbank, and river's just about 50 yards west of this fence line. So the natives would have came down through here. They encircled the camp and towards the southern edge where you can kind of make your way up and onto the main kind of flat area of the battlefield.
So with that pretty much is the walk around of the Battle of Tippecanoe battlefield, and looking at a dark and dastardly fight by High Flying Dice Games. taking a stroll through the map and looking at the actual space and a little bit of background about the battle and why it took place. Um, as it ended, it ended up as a strategic victory for the Americans. In terms of forces, I think both sides lost approximately the same number of casualties. But the natives had to retreat from Prophetstown. Following day, Harrison marched in, burned the village to the ground, and really, this launched him to success. In fact, he ran and was elected for president years later under the his campaign slogan was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. John Tyler is his vice president. So initial really hit initially after the battle wasn't necessarily seen. I know there's some newspaper articles out of like Cincinnati and areas that weren't as in Vincennes, not super supportive because again it wasn't a very decisive victory. But I think in retrospect, really the lore of the battle turned and really went to Harrison's side. So again, one last time, Dark and Dastardly Fight, Battle of Tippecanoe, 1811. Part of the Battles of Old Northwest series from High Flying Dice Games, excuse me, designed by Paul Rohrbaugh and beautiful art by Nils Johansson. Thank you for taking the time to sit with us through this video. If you want to see more about this game and the details, review, what I think about it, as well as reviews and playthroughs of other games, please feel free to follow our blog at cardboardconflicts.com. And thank you very much.